Good afternoon or good morning, class. Uh, if you could, open up a new tab and go to the Google Classroom, go to classwork, find the section for ecology, the different units are on the left, and scroll down through all the files related to ecology and find the PowerPoint. I'm going to try my very best to follow the PowerPoint and go through the interactions between organisms. But let's go ahead and start from the very beginning of the PowerPoint. It begins, of course, with a picture and then the standards, and it says I spy an ecosystem. Ecosystems are not all the same, depending on some factors. So the last video I put up was carrying capacity, and I mentioned that there is things that influence what carrying capacity is, like the amount of nutrients, the amount of space, the amount of water that is available. So not all ecosystems are the same because some have more water, like the Great Barrier Reef has a whole lot more water than the Sahara Desert. Some places have more nutrients. Like, for example, that desert has very little nutrients in the soil compared to what may be found in the Great Prairie here in the United States. And then space. Small islands don't necessarily have the same amount of land space as a giant continent. So ecosystems are different. Some of them are very small and some of them are very large. Some of them are very biodiverse and some of them are a little bit more simplistic. So not everything is equal. The next slide is stable ecosystem, and I define what that is with 3 steps. So stable. I think of stable a little bit different than what you may be thinking. You may be thinking of something standing in place that can't be moved. But I think of something stable as something that has its feet planted, but if someone's come up and pushed them, they don't fall over. They weeble and they wobble, but they don't fall down. That's still stable. Stable is able to keep themselves upright. So a stable ecosystem may bend one way or the other and fluctuate, but will eventually level back out and doesn't topple. That's stable. So what makes a stable ecosystem? Number 1, the population numbers of each species fluctuates at a relatively predictable rate. So in the last video I talked about mosquitoes. The number of mosquitoes may increase during the summer and then decrease during the winter. But if that fluctuates at a predictable rate, every year goes up and down and up and down, and stays within a certain range, then that's still a stable ecosystem. It's when it goes way above the normal range or drops down dangerously low or into extinction, then it's no longer stable. So we hear a lot about organisms going extinct right now. And that means that our ecosystems are not stable. We are losing populations of organisms. The second one is the supply of resources that fluctuates at a relatively predictable rate. So what are those resources? Like nutrients, the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, potassium. It could be other things as well, like water. If we had an annual monsoon, heavy rainfall that causes flooding, like we see in Southeastern Asia, if that happens annually, every year, then that's, yes, a flood period that has a lot of water, and then maybe during fall, very dry season. If that fluctuates back and forth, up and down, then that's still stable. The third one, energy flows. So if energy flows to an ecosystem at a fairly constant rate, then that means that it is stable. And energy I think of as food. It doesn't have to be just the sunlight for photosynthesizers or plants. It could be also the critters that eat the photosynthesizers, like the rabbits and the other herbivores, and then the things that eat those. If we keep energy flowing through an ecosystem in the form of food at a predictable rate, then it is stable. Alright, so the next slide is about carrying capacity, and I explained that already in the first video. Awesome. And then we get into the 6 areas of this unit. The first one is interaction between organisms, and then I list the other parts of this unit, all 6, and you can see that on slide 6. On slide 7, so the interactions, that's what I want to do in this video, the interactions between organisms. What I'm talking about is symbiotic relationships. Now, disclaimer, Symbiotic has more than one definition. Symbiotic can mean that both species are in a positive relationship. But I'm taking the very liberal approach with this word. I'm using symbiotic just means, in a very broad context, direct contact. So symbiotic relationship, where they just have direct contact, it doesn't have to be positive. In fact, most of these interactions that we're going to look at are not positive. But sometimes when we hear symbiotic relationship, the context means that it's both positive. But in this circumstance, I'm referring to that relationship plus others that are not both positive. That'll make more sense when we get to it. All right, next slide is number 8. There's 5 interactions. In middle school, you probably learned at least 2, 3, maybe 4 of them. Possibly 4, but I doubt that you learned all 5 because I find semester after semester students have no clue what commensalism is. And I start using that word and they just look at me like I'm an idiot. And it's not a word I made up, it is an interaction between organisms. So let's go through all of them. Even if you know a few of these, let's recap them. So the first one is predation. So predation is the relationship between a predator and prey. We want to look through this as winner-loser lens. So who's the winner? Well, the predator wins food, wins nutrition and energy. Well, who's the loser? The prey. The prey loses its life. It loses its ability to survive. So this is a relationship where we have a winner and a loser, a positive and a negative. So predation. Good example of predation is, of course, on the next slide, the fox and the hare. Now, something very interesting we can look at with these populations. As the numbers of prey increases, then that means there's more food available. Carrying capacity has risen for the fox population. So the predators will also increase. As the predators increase, they can influence the prey and cause the prey population to decrease, which of course means that the predator population will decrease. So both of them will fluctuate back and forth. This may make more sense if you look at slide 11. I have the prey and the predator in a graph, and you see the prey going up, and there's a delay. The prey is shown in red, and the predator is shown in blue dots. And there's a delay. As the prey population increases, after a period of time, the predator population will increase. Why? Because there's a delay in reproduction and making offspring. So it's going to take a while for the predator population to catch up to the amount of all the more food available. But as the predator population has started to increase, the prey population starts to decrease, which will cause an effect of the predator population to eventually decrease as well. So this is a predictable cycle, a fluctuation that stays within a range, and they're bouncing around. It's not a straight line like I showed with carrying capacity. Sometimes they fluctuate up and down, probably based off of seasons, because prey has certain times a year where they reproduce more than others. I had a video on Big Bug Island. So Big Bug Island is a source-fed video. I love it because it's where humans accidentally introduced a new predator to an island. A ship was shipwrecked, ran ashore, and while it was ashore and being repaired, a bunch of rats that were on the ship, a bunch meaning enough to reproduce, got onto the island. And rats had never been on the island before, and they began eating the wildlife. And one thing that they loved to eat were the bugs, the gigantic tree lobster bugs. They're not really tree lobsters, but they are nicknamed that. And they're about the size of a hand. Giant bugs, and the rats would eat them. And they ate them almost into extinction. And this was introducing a new predator into an island that changed the relationship between predator and prey. Now, you might be thinking, if the bugs go extinct, won't the rats? Well, rats eat a very diverse diet. They can eat insects, and they can also eat plant material. They can eat human scraps, because there's now humans living on the island. They have a very broad diet, so they can eat the bugs into extinction and still survive because they can move their diet to other things. The next one is parasitism. Parasitism is a relationship between a parasite and a host. So, who's the winner and loser? The parasite's the winner, it's getting nutrition, it's getting a home on its or in its host. So, the host is a loser. But what's the difference between a parasitism relationship and a predator prey relationship? Well, parasites typically don't kill their host too quickly, if they kill them at all. A predator quickly kills the prey, but a parasite wants to continue to use its host for a food source much longer. So some examples of some parasites are tapeworms and heartworms and bacteria that can live inside of you. I have a lovely picture of a tapeworm on page or slide 15. It is a long, flat worm that has a sucker in with little tiny teeth that bites onto the inside of your digestive tract, and it just grows throughout your small intestine and absorbs nutrients and expels its waste right into your gut. It is unpleasant, but you may have heard rumor that in the olden days people would eat tapeworms to lose weight. That is true. Not a best way of losing weight. Effective, but then you have a tapeworm that you have trouble getting out, and tapeworms can cause other problems, including bleeding and rupturing of your small intestine. Some parasites don't live in a host, but instead seek to feed off the surface of the host. Think of aphids, fleas, and mistletoe. So aphids are those little tiny white flies that you see late in summer, that if you were to go out in the yard and hit a bush and you see a bunch of little white flies come off, those are aphids, and they have little pointer beaks that stab into the leaves and stems of certain plants and pull the nutrition out. Fleas eat the dead skin and some live skin off of their hosts, like humans, and the mistletoe lives off the little bit of nutrients off of a tree, growing in its branches. Now, the relationship between parasite and host has got to be careful. The parasite does not want to quickly kill the host because then it's going to lose its food source or its home. And then to keep the relationship going, the host can't quickly kill off the parasite, otherwise the relationship disappears. So for this relationship to continue, it's a very tricky balance between the two. That slide with the tapeworm, that very dark area of the tree, that's mistletoe, and then of course you recognize the mosquito because you live in Sumter, South Carolina. The third one is competition. Competition is where two different species are competing for the same resource at the same time. Think of I have this in the next slide, number 17, two birds fighting over a scrap of food. That is competition. There will be a winner, per se. One's going to get a scrap of food. But from the lens of biology, we want to say that they're both losers. Why are they both losers? Because they had to fight for the resource. They had to fight for space or food or water, whatever that they were trying to get. In a perfect ecosystem, they wouldn't have to spend that extra time and energy. So we call them a loser. The cat is playing currently with the laptop. Sorry about that. In the image, you also see a group of trees. So these trees are competing for a few different things. They're competing for light, water, nutrients in the soil, space. They're all growing in the same spots. That is a competition. Now, there was a red word on that slide before the picture, and it's pronounced two different ways. Niche or niche. Both are acceptable, but I'm going to say niche, because niche just sounds wrong. A niche is where an organism lives and what it does, its role. So not only where you are, but what relationships you have with other things. That's your niche. And in competition, we have species competing for a niche sometimes, where they're wanting to live in a certain place and use certain resources, and they're having to compete with one another for that. This is one of those problems with invasive species. When we introduce something into an environment that's not supposed to be there, Like, for example, kudzu. Kudzu is a very invasive species here in Sumter, South Carolina, across the southeast. It was introduced from I want to say southern China, and brought over here to help control erosion. But it grows really well and doesn't have any pest or disease problems I'm aware of. So as it grows, nothing contains it. And it can outgrow our local species and choke out other vines and grasses and trees. It takes over a niche that other organisms used to have and kills them out. Alright, two more. Mutualism. So mutualism is what some people think of when they hear symbiotic relationship. But I'm going to use symbiotic relationship. All these have been symbiotic relationship. Mutualism is just one example. Mutualism is where both organisms benefit. So the opposite of competition. Competition is where one species and another both have to compete for space and resources, so they're both losers. In mutualism, we have two different species and they help one another. So they're both winning, they're both benefiting. Good example of this is mycorrhizae fungi. I had that on the next slide. Those roots that look like they have tumors on them, cancer spots, well, that's actually fungus growing there in and on the roots. And that fungus is not a bad thing. If you had a fungus growing on your feet like that, that would be bad. But for this plant, the fungus is supplying the plant with nitrogen, and the plant gives the fungus sugars. So they're helping each other out. One gets sugar, one gets nitrogen, they're both happy. Another example is termites and the bacteria that live in their gut. You may not realize this, but termites cannot digest wood. When a termite starts eating away at a wooden structure, they can't break that wood down alone. Instead, it's the bacteria inside their gut that breaks down the wood. So this is a mutualistic relationship. The termite is giving home to the bacteria in its gut and supplying it with all the food it needs while it's chewing down a structure. And then the bacteria is supplying the termite with nutrition by helping break down the wood down to a level that the termite can then use. So they're helping each other out. In fact, your gut has bacteria in it too that help you break down nutrients into a form that your cells can absorb. So you are much like the termite, and you have a relationship with your bacteria. That's why if you're on a very strong antibiotic, it can wipe out that good bacteria in your gut, and then you may have repercussions after that, like indigestion or diarrhea, because now you're having trouble digesting food normally. Excuse me one moment, that was my phone. I have just one more relationship. Oh, I forgot. Slide 21. The rhinoceros and the tick bird is a classic example. The rhinoceros needs help because it's being attacked by by parasites, and the tick bird will eat those parasites, those flies, and those gnats and ticks. And then the tick bird not only gets food, but it gets protection by riding on the back of the rhinoceros. The rhinoceros gets rid of parasites, and the tick bird gets rid of those parasites and gets protection. So that is a mutualistic relationship. And that brings us to our last one, commensalism. So commensalism is the one that you may not have learned before. Commensalism is a relationship between two organisms where one benefits and the other one just is there. It's not hurt or helped really in the relationship. So a good example of that to me is a blue jay building a nest in a tree. The tree is not really affected by the bird, at least not a whole lot. The bird doesn't hurt the tree, and the bird's not really helping the tree, but the tree is definitely helping the bird, supplying it with a place as a niche, a place to live. So this is commensalism. Another is a good example is beggar's lice. I like to walk in the fields and the woods, and sometimes when I walk through the woods by my pants or on my socks or shoes, I'll end up with some things, little seed pods stuck to them. Those little seed pods, if they are like Velcro, those are called beggar's lice, and sometimes I pick up sand spurs that are pointed and sharp. They get stuck in my shoelaces or on my pants legs. Those are not really causing me a whole lot of harm. They're definitely not helping me, but I'm helping those plants. I'm spreading the beggar's lice. I'm spreading the sand spurs, sending those seeds to different locations as I walk through the field that they couldn't travel on their own. So you are helping those species by spreading them out. That is commensalism. One benefits and the other one has no real harm or gain from the relationship. Have a good example of also the clownfish and the sea anemone. You may remember Finding Nemo. The sea anemone isn't really helped or harmed by the presence of the fish, but the sea anemone gives shelter to the clownfish. So the clownfish benefits, the sea anemone is not helped or harmed. Alright, I have a helpful chart where you can see the pluses and the minuses. That is on slide 24. And you see that predators win, they're positive, and prey are the losers. Same thing, same type of relationship with parasitism. We have a winner and a loser. Competition, both are losers because they're having to compete and spend time and energy. Mutualism, we're both winners. They both gain. And then commensalism, one gains and the other one has no real effect. Remember these five? These are the 5 forms of relationships between organisms. I'll see you later for the next topic.